Tonight we travel to the loneliest scrap of land on Earth. A dot of volcanic rock adrift in the vast blue expanse of the southeastern Pacific, over 2,000 miles from the nearest continent. You stand on the grassy rim of a long-extinct volcano, the wind a constant, whispering companion. It tugs at your clothes, hisses through the totora reeds in the crater lake below, and sings a low, mournful note as it wraps around the stone faces of hundreds of giants. They are all around you. Some stand sentinel on the outer slopes, their backs to the sea, their hollow eye sockets fixed on the island's interior. Others lie half-emerged from the soft, yellow tuff of the quarry wall, as if caught in the act of being born. And some are frozen mid-journey, tilted at impossible angles on the quarry floor, their voyage across the island arrested for centuries. This is Reino Raraku. The nursery. The workshop. The open-air museum of a dream that fell silent. The air here doesn't just feel old, it feels interrupted. You can almost hear the echo of the last toki, basalt adze, strike against the rock, a sound swallowed by a silence so deep and so long it has become a physical presence. You are not just visiting an archaeological site. You are walking into a question, carved in stone. And here's your first reality check, the one the glossy documentaries often gloss over. You probably wouldn't survive a month here if you were tossed back to the island's peak. Forget the mystery of the statues for a second. Your first battle would be for fresh water, trapped only in that crater lake, a tricky climb away. Your second would be for food on an island with no native land mammals larger than a beetle. Your survival would depend on the very Polynesian seafaring knowledge and communal effort that built this place. Knowledge that, if lost, would leave you as stranded and helpless as one of these fallen giants. It's a stark reminder that every grand human endeavor is, at its core, a story of practical survival. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Now, dim the lights, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The mainstream historical fact we must start with is this. Reino Raraku is the sole source of the stone used for the iconic moai statues. Every single one of the nearly 900 moai documented across Easter Island, or Rapa Nui, was carved from the compressed volcanic ash, or tuff, of this one mountain. It was a one-stop shop for giant ancestor manufacturing. Some fringe theorists, looking at the sheer scale and the island's isolation, have seriously proposed that the quarry itself is a natural energy vortex, or a landing site for ancient astronauts who gifted the technology. They point to the moai's elongated features and their uniform, staring expression as not of this world. Of course, archaeologists point to the thousands of stone tools littering the site and say the evidence for human hands, sweaty, calloused, brilliant human hands, is overwhelming. But the debate itself highlights how the place defies our easy understanding. And that leads us directly to the first open scholarly debate phrase we'll encounter. Historians and archaeologists still argue whether the quarry was worked continuously for centuries by a stable society, or in frantic, episodic bursts driven by rival chiefs. Was it a sacred, sustained tradition, or a series of megalithic sprints? The answer changes everything about how we interpret the moment the chisels fell silent. You walk slowly down the inner slope, the soft rock crunching underfoot. You pass a moai that never made it out of its niche. Only the brow ridge and the bridge of the nose are defined, the rest is still mountain. It's not a statue yet. It's a potential. A what-if made of stone. Ahead, another lies on its back, a long, graceful body with detailed hands clasped over its belly, forever holding its own silence. The scale is simultaneously awe-inspiring and intimately human. You get the sense that this wasn't just a factory. It was a landscape of belief, where stone was not just quarried, but awakened. And the first people from the outside world to stumble upon this scene were as bewildered as you are, perhaps more so, because they arrived with sails, muskets, and a calendar that gave this place a name it never asked for. The wind that whispers around the Moai carries a new sound, the crack of sailcloth and the creak of a wooden hull. The date is April 5, 1722. You're no longer alone on the island. You're standing on the deck of the Dutch West India Company ship Afrikaanse Galie, shoulder to shoulder with Admiral Jacob Roggeveen, who is squinting through a spyglass at the looming coastline. It's Easter Sunday. Hence, the name he scrawls on his chart, Pascheiland, Easter Island. A name born of European calendar coincidence, utterly disconnected from the Polynesian name its people likely used, Te Pito o Te Henua, the navel of the world. The first contact is a masterpiece of mutual misunderstanding. You see the islanders launching canoes, curious and likely cautious. Roggeveen sees potential threats. His orders are to fire a warning shot if they approach too boldly. The muskets bark over the water. We don't know if anyone was hit, but the violent punctuation mark at the very beginning of written history here sets a tragic tone. You come ashore with the Dutch party. The encounter is brief, just a day. Their journals are your eyes. They note the remarkable, tall stone figures with a kind of stunned disbelief, the large statues, representing the human figure to the hips, which told them these were torsos, not just heads. But their attention is fractured. They are obsessed with the lack of obvious wealth. No spices, no gold, no deep harbors. They note the poverty of the canoes, badly contrived, patched with tiny pieces of wood. They see a population they estimate in the thousands, but their gaze is colonial, seeing lack, not achievement. In a telling moment, they witness an islander light a fire by rapidly rubbing a pointed stick into a piece of dry wood, a common Polynesian technique, but to the Dutch, it seems so primitive it's worth special note. They completely miss the genius in the plain sight of the statues. The seed is planted. This is a mysterious, poor, and somehow failed place. The silence of the quarry, which they probably didn't even visit, is already being interpreted as the silence of collapse. Let's get a mainstream historical fact straight from this encounter. Roggeveen's log is the first written document to ever describe the Moai. He confirmed to Europe that these impossible giants existed. But his account also planted the enduring, and as we'll see, flawed, idea of a society in a degraded state from the very first moment of contact. Some have latched onto Roggeveen's description of the islanders as being of two distinct physical types, some tall, some shorter, to propose a pre-existing, non-Polynesian lost race like survivors from Atlantis or Mu who built the statues before the Polynesians arrived and wiped them out. It's a theory born from racial prejudice and a refusal to believe Polynesian people could have created such wonders, and modern genetics has thoroughly debunked it, showing a continuous Polynesian lineage. But it shows how first impressions can fossilize into dangerous myths. And this leads to the open debate that starts here. Historians still argue whether the society Roggeveen saw was already in a post-collapse tailspin or was a functioning, adapted culture that simply looked poor through European lenses. Was the primitive fire-making a sign of lost knowledge, or just the most efficient tool for the job on a treeless island? The answer shapes the entire story. You stand there on that beach, watching the Dutch barter for sweet potatoes and chickens, completely unaware they are also trading for something more lethal, microbes. Their brief visit is a breach in the island's biological isolation. While no major outbreak is recorded from this visit, the doorway is now open. The true end of the statue culture won't come from internal war, but from these ships on the horizon. As the Afrikaanse Galie shrinks to a dot on the vast ocean, the island returns to its wind-swept rhythm. But nothing is the same. It has been named, catalogued, and judged. The Moai continue their watch, but now a new narrative is sailing back to Europe, one of mystery and decline. For the next 52 years, the island is left alone again. Then, in 1774, Captain James Cook arrives. He finds a different island. He notes many statues are now toppled. He hears stories of warfare. He confirms the European assumption of a society in free fall. The quarry at Reino Raraku, if he saw it, would have been the ultimate proof, a project abandoned in chaos. But you, standing here now, know the story isn't that simple. To understand the silence, you must go to the source. You must leave the coast and its complicated history of visitors, and turn inland, toward the mountain that gave birth to the giants. You must climb the slope of Reino Raraku itself, to the very lip of the quarry, and meet the one who never left. The climb is steep, the ash-like tuff shifting under your feet with each step. You leave the green coastal plains behind, ascending into a browner, drier world. The wind is stronger here, less obstructed. With every few yards of elevation, more of the island unfurls beneath you, a triangular puzzle of lava flows, grassy hills, and the deep, brilliant blue of the ocean on all sides. You feel the isolation viscerally. Then you reach a ridge, and you see it. Not a statue, but the shadow of one. A colossal outline carved directly into the vertical face of the mountain. This is Te Takanga, the giant. It's not a freestanding moai, it's the mountain's skeleton, revealed. If completed and freed, it would have been over 69 feet tall and weighed an estimated 270 tons, nearly twice the size of the largest moai ever transported and erected. You stand there, your head not even reaching its carved chin line. This isn't just a statue, it's a statement of ambition so vast it borders on arrogance. And it's a question, frozen in the rock: why stop here? You walk closer, running a hand along the smooth, defined curve where the master carvers shaped the brow. The stone tools, the toki, made of harder basalt, have left their distinctive marks. You can see the systematic process, the initial outlining of the figure from the top down, the careful undercutting to free the back, the shaping of the arms and hands that would remain clasped along the sides. But the work on El Gigante is unfinished. The back is only partially separated from the bedrock. It is forever in a state of becoming, a bridge between the mountain and the monument. This is the heart of the quarry's mystery. It's not that the people left. It's that they left in the middle of things. It feels less like walking away from a job and more like dropping a tool because you were urgently called away. The mainstream historical fact that hits you here is the sheer scale of industry. Reino Raraku isn't just a few statues. Archaeologists have catalogued 426 moai in various stages of completion within the quarry itself, plus another 341 knockouts, or outlines in the rock face that were never even begun. This was a generations-long project, the absolute center of the island's creative and spiritual energy. Some alternative history enthusiasts, looking at its impossible size, propose it was never meant to be moved. They suggest it was intended to be a mountain god, a permanent, immovable guardian deity of the quarry itself, and that the carving stopped because it was always meant to be a relief, not a freestanding statue. It's a nice idea, a way to resolve the why, but the tool marks and the undercutting tell a different story. They were trying to free it. Which brings us to the open scholarly debate that hangs over this titan. Historians and archaeologists still argue whether El Gigante represents the climax of a statue-building arms race that finally overreached, or if it was a special, perhaps ritualistic project that was always intended to be a different class of monument, abandoned for symbolic rather than practical reasons. Was it the project that broke the culture's back, or was it a sacred outlier? The answer changes how we view the ambition of the society. Was this hubris, or piety? You sit on a rock, looking up at the giant's face. The eye sockets are blank, but you feel observed. You start to notice the logistics. The quarry isn't a single pit, It's a series of niches and corridors cut into the slopes. The largest moai come from the highest, most inaccessible niches. Moving them down would have been a terrifying engineering challenge even before the journey across the island began. You see the ramps and roads they built, grooves worn into the rock by countless feet and ropes. This was a landscape utterly transformed by human purpose. And then, your gaze shifts from the one giant to the many. You look down from your perch onto the quarry floor proper, a sprawling, chaotic gallery of stone figures in every conceivable pose. Some stand upright, buried to their chests in sediment. Others lie prone, as if sleeping. Some are tipped at drunken angles. It doesn't look like a planned storage yard. It looks like a moment frozen by a spell. The silence here is thick, layered with the ghosts of 1,000 simultaneous conversations, the shouts of teams coordinating, the rhythmic tap-tap-tap of adzes. You decide to climb down and lose yourself in that frozen moment. The descent from El Gigante's ledge is tricky, sending small avalanches of pebbles skittering down the slope. You reach the quarry floor, and the perspective shifts dramatically. Down here, you are among the moai, not looking up at them. They tower over you, but many are also trapped by the very earth. Centuries of erosion and soil accumulation have risen around them, so some appear as disembodied heads, the iconic image of Easter Island. But as you brush away dirt from the base of one, you reveal the truth. These are full-bodied figures, with detailed torsos, arms, hands with elongated fingers, and often intricate carvings of crescents or marine figures on their backs. They are buried in their own history. The floor is a labyrinthine workshop frozen in time. You weave between monolithic figures. Here, one lies on its back, its serene face staring at the sky, a long, straight channel cut beside it, the path it would have taken if it had ever been moved. There, another stands upright, but tilted sharply to one side, as if it stumbled and was caught mid-fall. You place your hand on the cool stone of a prone moai. The surface is smooth in some places, pockmarked by tool strikes in others. You can trace the work from rough shaping to fine detail. This wasn't a production line, it was a cradle. Each statue was an individual, carved with specific traits. Some have longer ears, some broader noses. Their backs are not blank slabs. Many have intricate petroglyphs carved into them, stylized crescent symbols known as komari, representing female fertility, or figures of the Birdman cult that emerged later. This detail, invisible once the statue was erected on a coastal platform, tells you something profound. The carving, the act of creation, was itself a sacred ritual. The value was in the making as much as in the finishing. The quarry was a consecrated space. Let's anchor with a mainstream historical fact about this scene. The quarry statues are not rejects or practice pieces. Analysis shows they are made of the same stone and with the same craftsmanship as the transported moai. They are, in essence, a permanent population of moai that never left their birthplace. They are a snapshot of the industry at its peak. Some visitors and researchers have reported a strange acoustic phenomenon in certain pockets of the quarry. Whispers seem to carry oddly, or a low hum is heard when the wind is just right. This has fueled all sorts of speculative ideas about the site being a resonance chamber for rituals or even that the moai themselves were designed to produce specific sounds. While archaeologists attribute it to wind funneling through the narrow stone corridors, it adds an eerie, sensory layer to the experience. You find yourself listening, not just looking. And this sensory experience ties into an open scholarly debate about the quarry's final state. Historians and archaeologists still argue whether the chaotic arrangement of moai on the quarry floor represents a sudden, panicked abandonment or a deliberate, orderly storage system that time and earth have since disguised. Were these statues lined up neatly on wooden supports, waiting for their turn to walk, before those supports rotted and let them tumble? Or was the work stoppage so abrupt that things were literally dropped where they stood? The interpretation paints very different pictures of the final days. You continue your walk, and the scale of the paused operation becomes overwhelming. You count the moai emerging from the slopes, see the empty knockout outlines where new ones were planned. The mental noise of the past is deafening, the dust, the shouts, the friction of ropes, the chanting. And then you see something that makes you pause. At the foot of one of the largest standing quarry moai, there is a small, circular pile of darker stones, a tupa, an earth oven. A simple, domestic artifact. Someone ate lunch here, in the shadow of a giant they were helping to create. This tiny detail shatters the monumentality. It personalizes it. These weren't built by an anonymous slave force under a megalomaniac king, as the old stories said. They were built by families, by clans, by people who took breaks, told jokes, and shared meals next to the stone ancestor they were bringing to life. This changes everything. To understand the silence, you need to understand not just how they were made, but why. What was the purpose of these stone beings that justified such immense effort? You turn your back on the quarry's frozen chaos and look toward the coast, where the finished moai kept their watch. Your gaze follows the ancient roads, now faint green tracks, leading from the mouth of the quarry down toward the island's coastline. That is where the finished moai were meant to go. You leave the cacophony of frozen birth and walk toward the realm of finished purpose. After a few miles, you reach the coast. The sound of the wind is joined by the crash of Pacific waves against black lava rock. And here, facing inland, stands an ahu, a massive, rectangular ceremonial platform built with exquisite masonry. And upon it, a line of moai, their backs to the sea, their sightless eyes watching over a now vanished village. This is the completed vision. Up close, you see details lost in the quarry. The eye sockets, which looked empty on the mountain, were once inlaid with white coral and pupils of gleaming red scory stone. They had eyes. They saw. Their heads were not bare. They once wore massive cylindrical topknots, pukao, carved from a different, red-colored quarry called puna pao. These were not bleak, grim sentinels. They were colorful, adorned, alive with spiritual power. You learn the mainstream historical fact of their purpose. The moai are not gods, but deified ancestors. Each one represented a specific, important lineage founder. By carving his likeness in the eternal stone of Reino Raraku and placing it on the clan's ahu, the living community created a permanent conduit for mana, spiritual power and authority. The moai's back was to the ocean, not to ignore it, but to project its mana inward, protecting and blessing the clan's lands, its crops, and its people. The statue was a mediator between the worlds. The quarry, then, was not just a workshop. It was a spiritual nursery where this transformation from inert rock to vessel of mana began. The act of carving was an act of invocation. Some observers, noting how some ahu are aligned with celestial events like the solstice sunrise, have proposed the moai were part of a vast, island-wide astronomical calendar or even a landing beacon for, well, you know the theory. The more grounded, but still fascinating, in the 1800s, after the statues were toppled, some Rapa Nui people used the fallen moai as building material for stone walls and even as bridges over streams. It seems shocking, repurposing your sacred ancestors as stepping stones. But it also speaks to a profound practicality and a shifting worldview. The mana had faded, but the sturdy stone remained useful. This practice touches on an open scholarly debate that is central to the story. Historians and archaeologists still argue whether the moai cult represented a stable, unifying force for the island society or was inherently competitive and destabilizing. Was the statue building a shared cultural project that reinforced social bonds, or an arms race between rival chiefs that ultimately consumed the island's resources? Were the coastal Ahu expressions of shared identity or territorial markers in a silent, stone-faced Cold War? The answer determines whether the end of carving was a societal failure or a strategic adaptation. Standing before the Ahu, you feel the difference from the quarry. Here, there is order, intention, completion. The silence here is different. It's the silence of a job finished, of a duty performed for generations. But look closer. Many of these coastal moai are toppled, faces in the date, their pukow rolled far away. This didn't happen at the quarry. The quarry was paused. The Ahu were violently desecrated. This is a critical clue. Whatever ended the statue-making tradition, and whatever later toppled the statues, were likely two different events, separated by time and motive. The silence of Reno Raraku is one kind of mystery. The fallen giants on the coast are another. You realize you've been thinking of the statue builders as a monolithic, anonymous force. But of course, they weren't. They were individuals with names, skills, and social roles. Who were the hands that wielded the toki? Were they a secretive guild of master artists, or was every family a participant? To understand the project scale, you need to meet the builders. You turn your back on the coastal platforms and begin the walk back to the mountain, this time looking for the people in the shadows of the stones. The walk back to Reno Raraku feels different. You're no longer just seeing monuments, you're looking for the makers. The evidence is everywhere, once you know how to look. You pass a low outcrop of darker, harder basalt, the material for the toki adzes. You see the quarry pits where these tools were extracted. You start to notice the subtle, human-scale geography of the main quarry. It's not one homogeneous work site. There are distinct areas, almost like stalls or studios, each with its own cluster of moai in similar styles or stages of completion. In one area, the statues have particularly long, elegant ears. In another, the facial features are broader, more pronounced. This isn't random. This is the signature of different carving groups, perhaps different clans or family guilds, working side by side in the same sacred space. You sit in one of these studios, surrounded by half-emerged figures. You pick up a discarded toki from the countless littering the ground. Its edge is chipped from relentless use. Who held this? The mainstream historical view is shifting. It likely wasn't an enslaved underclass. The work was too skilled, too ritually important. The carvers probably held a high social status, maybe a hereditary one, a Maori, expert, class who possessed the technical and spiritual knowledge to awaken the mana in the stone. Their role was part engineer, part sculptor, part priest. They were the bridge between the chief who commissioned the ancestor and the mountain that provided its body. In the 1960s, a Swiss writer named Erich von Daniken, in his book Chariots of the Gods, looked at the moai and the island's isolation and declared it all impossible for primitive people. His evidence for alien assistance? He misread Rapa Nui's ancient script, Rongorongo, as writing from the stars, and claimed the islanders themselves told him the statues walked with the help of a magical sound vibration taught by sky gods. While the walking theory, as you'll see, has a very human explanation, von Daniken's fantasy stripped the Rapa Nui people of their genius and replaced it with a sci-fi cartoon. It's the ultimate, insulting fringe theory, born of a refusal to believe in human capability, which leads to a genuine and open scholarly debate about the social organization of the work. Historians and archaeologists still argue whether the carving was centralized under a single, powerful paramount chief who directed all labor, or was a decentralized, clan-based enterprise where each lineage worked on its own ancestors, sharing the sacred space of Reno Raraku but not the chain of command. The physical layout of the quarry, those distinct workshops, strongly suggests the latter. It hints at a society that was collaborative but not monolithic, united in belief but diverse in expression. This makes the eventual silence more complex. It wouldn't have been a single king giving an order to stop. It would have been many groups, one by one, laying down their tools. You try to imagine a day here at the peak. The air thick with fine volcanic dust. The sounds, the precise tap-tap-tap of the master carvers defining a lip curve, the heavier thunk of others using basalt picks to undercut a back, the chants and work songs to coordinate rhythm. You see people not as a faceless mass, but as specialists, the master planners who outlined the figures, the strength laborers doing the rough shaping, the detail artists, the rope makers, the cooks like the one who used that earth oven. This was a symphony of coordinated effort, a societal project that bound the community together across generations. It gave purpose, identity, and structure. And this forces the next, most practical question of all. You've seen the studio. You've met the artists, in your mind. But how did they get the finished product from this mountain to a coastal Ahu 10 miles away? The how of moving a 20-ton stone giant across rugged terrain is not just an engineering puzzle. It's a key to understanding the society's sophistication and cohesion. You need to witness a moai take its first steps. The question of movement has haunted Easter Island since Roggeveen first saw the statues standing far from the quarry. For centuries, the prevailing image was one of backbreaking, slave-driven misery. Thousands of people hauling on ropes, dragging the moai on log rollers over a landscape that was, according to the old collapse story, denuded of trees. It painted a picture of a society so obsessed with its statues that it literally sacrificed its environment to move them. But you're standing in the quarry now, looking at a 14-foot moai lying on its back, ready for its journey. You're not seeing slaves. You're seeing physicists. The mainstream historical fact that changed everything came from experimental archaeology. In 2011, a team led by archaeologists Terry Hunt and Carl Lipo, along with Rapa Nui community members, decided to test an old oral tradition. The tradition said the moai walked. Not literally, but that they were moved upright in a rocking, swaying motion. The team carved a concrete replica of a moai, about 10 feet tall and weighing 5 tons. They attached 3 strong ropes to it, one on each side at the head, and one at the back for stabilization. Then, with a crew of just 18 people, they began to pull. Not steadily, but rhythmically. They pulled one side rope, tilting the statue onto one corner of its base, then pulled the other side to rock it onto the opposite corner. Back and forth. Rock, tilt, step. Rock, tilt, step. And something magical happened. With a practiced rhythm, the massive statue began to walk forward across the landscape, swaying with a dignified, almost living gait. A team of 18 could move a multi-ton statue hundreds of yards in a day. It didn't require an army or a forest of logs. It required coordination, rhythm, and knowledge. When the team published their findings, some commentators, stuck in the old collapse narrative, scoffed. One of the more absurd criticisms was that the method would have worn flat, smooth bases on the moai, and since many bases are unfinished or rough, the theory must be wrong. They completely missed the point. The bases are rough because the moai were not finished until they reached their ahu. The final shaping of the base happened on the platform. The walking theory elegantly explains other things, like why so many moai found fallen along the ancient roads are face down. They fell forward, the direction of travel. This leads to an open scholarly debate that is still very much alive. While the walking theory is compelling and well demonstrated, historians and archaeologists still argue whether it was the only method used. For the very largest moai, over 60 tons, could they have been walked safely, or were multiple methods, including sledges, rollers, or a combination, used depending on the terrain and the size of the statue? The debate isn't about if they moved them, but about the full toolkit of their brilliant engineering. You close your eyes and try to hear it. The call of the lead rope puller setting the rhythm. The responding chants of the team. The deep, grating thump as the stone base corners hit the earth. Heave, rock. Heave, step. It would have been a spectacle, a public performance of communal power and ritual. The moving of an ancestor was likely a sacred procession, weaving across the island, reinforcing the connection between the Quarry Mountain and the clan lands. It bound the people together in a shared, tangible goal. This changes the narrative from one of wasteful toil to one of celebrated, skillful collaboration. But the statue's journey wasn't over when it reached the Ahu. There, it faced its greatest physical challenge, going from horizontal to vertical. And then, it needed its crowning glory. You turn from the moai on the quarry floor and look toward the red stone summit of a distant, smaller volcano called Puna Pau. That's where the final touch awaited, the giant top knot that would transform a statue into a completed ancestor. Puna Pau is a world apart from Reino Raraku. The stone here is a vibrant, rusty red scoria, lighter and more porous than the yellow-grey tuff of the main quarry. The craters are smaller, shallower, and the remnants of work feel different, less about emerging forms, more about extraction. Here, they weren't carving figures, they were quarrying giant cylinders, some weighing over 12 tons. These are the pukau, the top knots or hats that were placed on the heads of many moai once they were standing on their ahu. You stand at the rim, looking down at a few abandoned cylinders. They look like colossal chess rooks. The engineering challenge here is mind-bending in a different way. How do you lift a 12-ton, cylindrical stone and balance it precisely on top of a statue that's already 20 or 30 feet tall? The mainstream historical theory, supported by the presence of ramps and embankments around many ahu, is a process called parbuckling. Imagine the pukau at the base of a large, earthen ramp that leads up to the back of the ahu platform. Long ropes would be passed over the top of the already erected moai and attached to the cylinder. By pulling on the ropes from the front of the ahu, teams could roll the pukau up the ramp, using the statue itself as a pulley point. It's a simple, elegant use of leverage and gravity. Once the pukau reached the top of the platform, it would have been painstakingly inched onto the moai's head, likely using wooden levers and a final, careful rocking motion. The fit wasn't always perfect. Some pukau have small stones wedged underneath to level them. This wasn't the work of magic. It was the work of patient, brilliant mechanics. Some early European visitors, seeing them separated from their moai and scattered, thought they were red wigs or representations of flaming hair. This led to speculative theories that the moai depicted a race of red-haired giants. A more persistent fringe theory is that the pukau aren't hats or hair at all, but stylized representations of baskets, specifically the baskets used in the ritual collection of the first fruits of the sweet potato harvest, symbolizing the ancestors' role as a provider. While most scholars see them as top knots, a common sign of status in Polynesian societies, the basket theory highlights how every element of the moai is loaded with potential meaning. This, of course, sparks an open scholarly debate. Historians and archaeologists still argue about the precise meaning and function of the pukau. Were they purely status markers, denoting a high-ranking ancestor? Did they symbolize a particular type of chieftainship? Or did they have a more practical, ritual purpose, perhaps as a separate vessel for mana that was placed upon the statue to activate it fully? The debate is about understanding the final layer of intention in this monumental project. You try to envision the final ceremony. The moai is upright, its coral eyes not yet installed, staring blankly inland. The community is gathered. The massive red cylinder rests on the platform behind it. A master of ceremonies gives the order. Teams take up the ropes. A unified heave, and the pukau begins its slow, rolling ascent up the earthen ramp, the ropes groaning over the shoulders of the statue. It reaches the summit. There's a tense, quiet moment as workers use levers to pivot it onto the broad, flat head. A final adjustment. It settles. Then, perhaps, the coral and scory eyes are placed in their sockets. In that moment, the transformation is complete. The stone from Reino Raraku is fully invested. The ancestor is now present, watching, protecting. It is the climax of generations of work, from quarry to walk to raising to crowning. This was a society operating at the peak of its organizational and spiritual power. But this is where the old, dark story traditionally kicks in. The story you've probably heard. The cautionary tale for our times. It's a narrative so compelling and seemingly logical that it dominated the understanding of Easter Island for decades. It's the story of ecocide, of a people so obsessed with their statues that they chopped down every last tree, collapsed their ecosystem, and plunged into warfare, cannibalism, and societal ruin. The silence of Reino Raraku, in this story, is the silence after the party, when the resources are gone and the bill comes due. You've now seen enough of the genius and coordination to feel that this story is too simple, too neat, and too condemning. It's time to confront that dominant narrative head-on, to understand where it came from, and to see why modern science is quietly but decisively dismantling it. For most of the late 20th and early 21st centuries, one story explained Easter Island. It was a parable, a ghost story for the global age. You know its beats. It goes like this. A thriving Polynesian society arrives on a wooded island paradise. Their religion evolves into a cult of statue building. Chiefs, locked in competitive one-upmanship, demand bigger and bigger moai. To move them, they need massive log rollers. They clear the forests. They cut down every single tree. No more logs. No more canoes for deep-sea fishing. No more protection from soil erosion. Birds vanish. Crops fail. The ecosystem crumbles. With no timber and dwindling food, society fractures. The once sacred moai are toppled in violent clan warfare. Chaos reigns. Cannibalism emerges in the desperate struggle. The population crashes. By the time Europeans arrive, they find a shattered, impoverished remnant living in caves, surrounded by the ruins of their own hubris. The silence of Reino Raraku, in this story, is the sound of collective regret. This narrative was packaged into a best-selling book and became a staple of documentaries. It's powerful. It's clear. It warns us about environmental limits and the folly of competition. There's just one problem. An increasing mountain of archaeological and paleoecological evidence suggests it's mostly wrong. Let's start with the mainstream historical fact that anchored the old story. The island was deforested. Pollen records from Lake Cores show the dominant palm tree, a species related to the Chilean wine palm, did disappear. This fact is indisputable. But the why and the consequences are where the story unravels. The deforestation was likely a slow process, taking centuries, not a sudden, catastrophic clue cut. And the culprit might not have been just statue moving. The introduced Polynesian rat, Rattus exulans, which stowed away on the original canoes, is a prime suspect. With no natural predators, they would have devoured palm nuts, preventing forest regeneration. The rats, not the rollers, may have been the silent loggers. The idea of widespread cannibalism. Early European accounts, filtered through terror and prejudice, reported tales of it. This fed into the savage collapse imagery. However, hard archaeological evidence for systematic cannibalism on Rapa Nui is virtually non-existent. A few cut marks on bones could indicate ritual treatment of the dead, common in Polynesia, or even starvation-era desperation, not a sustained cultural practice. Yet this grim detail became a central, sensational pillar of the ecocide story, reinforcing the image of a society that had fallen into utter barbarism. This leads to the open scholarly debate that is now tearing the old story apart. Historians, archaeologists, and paleoecologists still argue fiercely about the primary driver of the ecological changes and their link to societal change. Was it human recklessness, the classic ecocide, the rat infestation, a shifting climate, or a complex interplay of all three? More critically, did this ecological change cause a societal collapse, or did the society adapt to it? The new evidence points strongly toward adaptation. You stand in the quarry again, but now you see it through the lens of this old, grim tale. It would have you believe this place is a crime scene of ecological folly. But look at the evidence on the ground. The walking theory shows they didn't need forests of logs. The palm wood, while useful, wasn't the only resource. They became master stoneworkers, building sophisticated stone garden enclosures, manavai, to protect crops from the now unchecked wind. They shifted their diet to rely more heavily on chickens and rock-walled coastal gardens for sweet potatoes. They adapted. The toppling of the Moai, which happened after European contact, appears less like an active resource war and more like a profound religious and political revolution, a deliberate rejection of the old ancestor cult, perhaps after it had failed to protect them from the new, invisible enemy that arrived on European ships, disease. The real story of the end is not here in the quarry, but in the germs that came from across the sea. To find the truth, we need a new way of seeing, a tool the old explorers never had. We need to get off the ground and look at Reino Raraku from a god's eye view. The old stories were written from the ground, pieced together from fragments, a fallen statue, a charcoal layer, a rat-gnawed seed. To solve a puzzle this vast and frozen, you need to see it whole. You need to step back. Way back. In the 21st century, the tool for that is the drone. Picture a small, multi-rotor device, buzzing like a mechanical insect, lifting off from the floor of Reino Raraku. It ascends, and with it, your perspective soars. The tilted Moai shrink from giants to toys. The quarried slopes reveal their full, scarred pattern. The drone's camera clicks automatically, thousands of times, capturing every crevice, every statue, every tool mark from hundreds of overlapping angles. This isn't just photography, it's digital resurrection. The year is 2019, and a team from the University of California, Davis, is doing exactly this, capturing over 11,000 high-resolution images. Their goal? To build the first comprehensive, centimeter-accurate 3D model of the entire quarry complex. But there's an urgency to their work beyond pure research. Just 2 years earlier, in 2017, a devastating wildfire, likely human-caused, swept across the island, licking at the bases of the Moai in Reino Raraku. The intense heat cracked and damaged the porous tuff. The drone survey is also a digital preservation project, a backup copy of a world that is, like all things, ephemeral. You watch the drone's live feed. The quarry, which felt so labyrinthine and chaotic at ground level, begins to reveal its hidden logic from above. You can see the roads leading out like spokes. You can see the pockmarks of extraction. And most strikingly, you can see clusters. The statues aren't randomly scattered. They group together in certain zones of the volcano's slopes. The 3D model, once processed, will allow archaeologists to fly through the site, to take measurements without setting foot on fragile ground, to see relationships invisible from any single vantage point. This is a revolution in perception. It's like putting on a pair of glasses for the first time and realizing the blur you thought was the world was just your own limited sight. Here's a mainstream historical fact of the modern era. The use of drone photogrammetry and LiDAR, light detection and ranging, has revolutionized archaeology worldwide, from mapping Mayan cities in Guatemala to revealing lost Roman roads. On Rapa Nui, It's providing the first complete inventory of the quarry's population. Some critics, wary of modern intrusion, see the buzzing drones as a new form of colonial disrespect, a technological violation of a sacred space. Others, at the opposite fringe, spin wild theories that the drones are actually mapping energy grids or ley lines they believe are connected to the statues. Both reactions miss the point. The technology is a tool for listening more carefully, for seeing the subtle patterns left by the people who were here first. This new way of seeing fuels an open scholarly debate about methodology itself. Historians and archaeologists still argue about how much we can truly understand from remote sensing alone versus the irreplaceable, tactile evidence of traditional excavation. The 3D model is a map, not the territory. It can show you where a toki lies, but it can't let you feel its weight or analyze the microscopic wear patterns on its edge that tell you exactly how it was used. The future lies in combining the god's eye view with the dirt under the fingernails work. As the drone completes its passes and lands, the real work begins on computers. The thousands of photos are stitched together using powerful software. Slowly, a breathtaking, three-dimensional replica of Reino Raraku grows on the screen. It is exact. You can zoom in to see individual tool strokes. You can zoom out to see the entire mountain. And from this new vantage point, the most important revelation comes into sharp, undeniable focus. The quarry was not one chaotic, monolithic project. It was a collection of many. The clustering seen from the air resolves into at least 30 distinct, independent workshops. This changes everything. You lean closer to the screen, your journey moving from the physical silence of the stone to the digital clarity of the pattern. The story of a single, doomed society is about to fracture into a more complex, more human truth. The high-resolution 3D model is more than a map. It's a time machine that lets you filter out the noise of centuries. On the screen, you can isolate features. You tag all the moai in one specific cluster on the southeastern slope. The software highlights them in blue. You then tag the toki, adds, fragments recorded in that same zone. They glow red. A pattern emerges. This cluster has its own style, statues with a distinct, sloping forehead. The density of tool debris forms a neat halo around them. This isn't just where statues ended up. This is where a specific group of people worked. You repeat the process for another cluster on the northern face. Here, the statues have broader noses. The tool debris is concentrated differently, and you can even make out the faint outlines of what might have been temporary shelters or work platforms in the digital elevation data. You are looking at the signature of a separate team. The mainstream historical revelation from this analysis is profound. Reino Raraku was not a single, centrally managed factory. It was a consortium of independent workshops, likely operated by different kin groups or clans from across the island. Each clan probably had rights to a specific portion of the sacred mountain. They came here, generation after generation, to work on their own lineage's ancestors. They shared the sacred space and the overarching belief system, but they worked on their own projects, in their own style, at their own pace. This explains the chaotic yet clustered appearance of the quarry floor. It wasn't chaos, it was decentralized organization. The silence, then, didn't fall like a single curtain. It would have been more like the lights going out in one workshop, then another, over time. The concept of multiple independent groups working side by side has been used by some to argue for the two races theory, that different workshops were actually different ethnic groups, one building the classic moai and another, later group responsible for the different, cruder styles. The 3D data, however, shows stylistic variation within the same time periods and the same quarry stone, suggesting artistic choice and clan identity, not separate peoples. It highlights diversity within a unified culture. This discovery, of course, ignites a fresh and open scholarly debate. With clear evidence of multiple independent groups, historians and archaeologists still argue fiercely about the nature of the relationships between these clans. Were they in peaceful collaboration, sharing techniques and labor in a grand, unifying cultural project? Or were they in quiet, intense competition, using the size and number of their moai as statements of political and spiritual one-upmanship, a Cold War in stone? The truth likely lies in a messy middle ground: cooperation in shared belief and ritual, competition in display. But the key point is this: a society capable of sustaining 30+ simultaneous long-term projects in one coordinated space is not a society on the brink of collapse. It is a complex, structured, and resilient society. You fly the drone model over the quarry, following one of the ancient roads that leads from a workshop cluster down to the coast. You can see how each clan's road connects their workspace to their territory. The island, from this digital sky, looks less like a kingdom and more like a federation. The resources for statue building weren't just the stone and the labor. They were the social cohesion, the shared ritual knowledge, the intergenerational commitment. So what could break that? Not a lack of trees. A society this adaptable could work around that. The breaking point would have to be something that shattered the social fabric itself, something that destroyed the clan's ability to organize, to marshal communal labor, to believe in the future enough to carve an ancestor for it. As you pivot the digital view, looking from the mountain workshops out to the sea, the answer becomes clear. The threat didn't come from the island running out of resources. It came from the ocean, bringing a resource the island had no defense against: invisible, microscopic invaders that attacked not the trees, but the people. The real collapse wasn't ecological, it was demographic. The digital model fades from your mind's eye, replaced by the hard reality of the coastline on a day after contact. The year is now the late 1700s. Spanish ships in 1770, Cook's second expedition in 1774, French ships in the 1780s. Each visit is a brief, often violent, exchange. But the most lethal cargo isn't traded, it's breathed. It's passed on a handshake, a cough, in the close quarters of a ship's hold where islanders are sometimes taken and then released. You are no longer just an observer of stone, you are a witness to an invisible apocalypse. The mainstream historical fact, supported by genetic studies and the timelines of epidemics spread across the Pacific, is that isolated populations like Rapa Nui had no immunity to old world diseases. Smallpox, influenza, measles, tuberculosis, each could burn through the community like wildfire in dry grass, killing not just individuals, but elders, priests, master carvers, the keepers of oral history and technical knowledge. A single epidemic could wipe out an entire clan's leadership and skilled workforce in a matter of weeks. You stand at an ahu where the moai lies toppled. The old story said this was done in resource wars. But the timing, painstakingly cross-referenced with European logs and archaeological layers, suggests most were toppled after 1722, in the century of disease and slave raids that followed. Imagine the societal trauma. The ancestor cult, the moai, were meant to protect the people. Yet, the people are dying in waves from a scourge the ancestors cannot stop. Faith in the old system would crumble. Toppling the moai might have been an act of anger, of rejection, of a desperate attempt to find new answers. It was a spiritual revolution, triggered by an epidemiological catastrophe. The silence in Reino Raraku wasn't because they ran out of trees. It was because they ran out of time, knowledge, and hands. In the 1860s, Peruvian slave raiders carried off over 1,500 Rapa Nui people, over half the remaining population, to work in the guano mines of the Chincha Islands. It was an act of near-genocidal brutality. A macabre footnote is that among the few dozen who were eventually repatriated, after international pressure, they brought back a final, devastating gift: smallpox. The epidemic that followed nearly finished the job. This isn't a fringe theory, it's a horrific historical fact that underscores the external nature of the collapse. This period forces an open scholarly debate that reframes the entire narrative. Historians and demographic modelers still argue about the pre-contact population size, was it 3,000 or 15,000, and the specific impact of each wave of disease versus the slave raids. But the consensus is now clear. The catastrophic population decline was caused by external forces after 1722, not by internal ecological mismanagement centuries before. The society that built the Moai was resilient and adapted to ecological change. It was not resilient to the onslaught of the globalized world. You walk back from the coast toward Reino Raraku, but the mountain feels different now. You see the workshops not as scenes of abandonment, but as classrooms that lost their teachers. The last master carver in a particular lineage dies without an apprentice. His specialized knowledge of how to undercut a 50-ton block safely dies with him. The clan, decimated by disease, no longer has the healthy adults needed for the rhythmic, coordinated walk of a new ancestor. The social contract that bound the community to these multi-generational projects dissolves in a fog of grief and survival. The work doesn't stop with a bang, but with a slow, sad fading. A clan skips a season of work to tend to the sick. Then another. The intent to return is always there, but the capacity is gone. The Moai in the quarry aren't abandoned, they are waiting for a future that never came. This changes the moral of the story entirely. It's not a parable about ruining your own environment. It's a more universal, and perhaps more frightening, story about the fragility of complex knowledge and social structures in the face of an outside shock. The silence is not a judgment on them, it's a testament to what was taken from them. With this understanding, the quarry transforms from a monument to failure into something else entirely. The wind still blows through Reino Raraku, but now you hear it differently. It's no longer just the sigh of abandonment, it's the breath of a place holding its story. You stand in one of the 30 workshops, your hand on the cool flank of a Moai whose journey was postponed forever. But postponed is not failed. This is the crucial shift. If the end came from a rapid, external demographic collapse after 1722, then the society that operated here for the preceding 500 years was a staggering success. Think about it. For half a millennium, through climatic shifts and ecological changes, multiple clans sustained a shared, incredibly labor-intensive cultural tradition. They adapted their agriculture, they engineered ingenious transportation methods, they maintained a complex social order that allowed for both cooperation and competition within a sacred space. That is the definition of resilience. The silence, therefore, is not the silence of a crime scene. It is the respectful quiet after a long and remarkable performance. The players left the stage, not because the theater collapsed, but because a catastrophe from outside the playhouse took them. Let's cement this with a mainstream historical fact that underscores this resilience. Radiocarbon dating and archaeological sequences show that statue construction was not a constant, frantic binge. It ebbed and flowed over centuries. There were pauses, shifts in style, periods of focus on other things like the later Birdman cult. This is the pattern of a living, adapting culture, not a blind, compulsive drive to self-destruction. The quarry was active, then less active, then active again, responding to the internal dynamics of the society. Its final quieting coincides not with the last tree being cut, but with the irrevocable breaking of the social chain after European contact. In recent decades, the Rapa Nui people have not just been passive inheritors of a tragic past. They have actively reclaimed their narrative. Using a combination of oral history, archaeological science, and that most modern of tools, the internet, Rapa Nui scholars and community leaders are forcefully correcting the ecocide myth. They point out how it cast their ancestors as foolish, self-destructive primitives, a stereotype that served to justify colonial control. In reclaiming the story as one of brilliance and resilience interrupted by foreign disease and violence, they are not just rewriting history, they are repairing identity. It's a powerful form of cultural restitution happening in real time. This reclamation effort is part of an open scholarly and cultural debate that is far more productive than the old collapse arguments. Historians, archaeologists, and the Rapa Nui community still argue. But now the debate is about agency and continuity. How much of the pre-contact knowledge survived the demographic catastrophe? How do modern cultural practices connect to the world of the Moai builders? The debate is no longer about what killed them, but about how they lived, and how that life echoes today. It's a shift from autopsy to biography. You walk slowly out of the workshop, giving the unfinished Moai a final look. It is no longer a symbol of hubris. It is a library. Its very incompleteness is data. The angle of the tool marks tells us about the craftsman's stance. The stage of completion tells us about the workflow. The stylistic nuance tells us about clan identity. The quarry is not a graveyard of a dream. It is the most detailed archive of that dream we could ever hope for, precisely because it was frozen in process. The old story demanded a single, dramatic cause of death. The new understanding reveals a long, accomplished life, followed by a death from complications introduced by a foreign agent. This reframing lifts a weight not just from the island, but from you, the listener. It replaces a chilling parable of self-destruction with a more nuanced, human story of creativity, adaptation, and the fragile threads that hold a society together. With that weight lifted, you can take a final, clear-eyed walk through the quarry, not to solve a mystery, but to pay respects to what was achieved, and to listen to what the long silence is finally able to say. The path you take now is a slow circuit, a final walk with the giants. The urgency to find an answer has faded. You're not here to interrogate the silence anymore. You're here to understand its texture. You stop before a Moai buried to its shoulders. Moss grows in the creases of its stylized collarbone. A small, bright yellow flower has taken root in the soil cradled in the hollow of its ear. Life is quite literally growing from the paused work. This isn't decay, it's integration. The island is slowly, gently, reclaiming its own. You think of the 3D model, the 30 workshops. From this ground-level view, you can almost see the boundaries. Here, the statues have a certain set to the jaw. 10 yards away, the lips are fuller. You're not looking at a monolithic failure, but at the fossilized imprint of a vibrant, diverse community. Each of these stone beings was a project of hope, an investment in a future where the clan would thrive under the watchful mana of its ancestor. The fact that the investment was left incomplete doesn't negate the hope. It suspends it, like a sentence ending in an ellipsis rather than a period. The mainstream historical perspective you now hold is one of admiration, not condemnation. The Rapa Nui statue building period represents one of the most extraordinary achievements in human prehistory, precisely because it was done in such profound isolation. With no examples to copy, no outside trade for new ideas, they invented, refined, and sustained a unique monumental tradition for half a millennium. That's longer than the Roman Empire lasted in the West. Theirs was a success story of stunning duration, and its end tells us more about the vulnerability of all isolated societies to global forces than about any inherent flaw. Visitors often report a strange phenomenon after spending time among the Moai. It's not a hum or a whisper, but a feeling. The overwhelming initial impression of mystery and melancholy slowly gives way to something else. a profound calm. The moai, with their serene, knowing expressions, seem to exude a deep, stoic patience. Perhaps it's projection. Or perhaps, once you let go of the frantic why and simply accept the what, you tune into the timeless, steady presence of the stone itself. They have seen the rise and fall of the forest, the arrival of ships, the passing of plagues, and the return of the flowers. And they are still here. It's a strangely comforting realization. This feeling connects to the final, open-ended scholarly debate that now surrounds Rapa Nui. With the old collapse narrative largely retired, historians and archaeologists are free to ask richer questions. They still argue, but the arguments are about life, not death. They debate the nuances of clan social structure, the intricacies of the Mana belief system, the daily lives of the carvers beyond their work, the role of women in the statue culture, which was likely significant, given the fertility symbols on the statues' backs. The quarry is no longer a puzzle with one missing piece. It's a doorway into a lost world, and we are just beginning to learn how to cross its threshold. As the afternoon light grows long, casting deep shadows that make the statues seem to emerge even more sharply from the earth, you find a spot to sit. You look from one unfinished face to another. You think of the meal shared by the earth oven, the rhythm of the walking teams, the final heave of the pukao. You see a society, not a cautionary tale. A symphony, not a crash. The long silence of Reino Raraku is not an empty void. It is a space. A space that held a complex, thriving human endeavor. A space that was violently disrupted. And a space that now holds the memory of both. The silence is what remains when the music stops, but the echo, you realize, is still traveling. It's in the 3D models, in the reclaimed narratives, in the flowers growing from the stone ears. The work in the quarry stopped, but the story, thankfully, did not. It was just waiting for us to learn how to listen. The sun dips toward the sea, painting the slopes of Reino Raraku in washes of gold and deep violet. The wind, your constant companion, drops to a sigh. In this softening light, the sharp edges of the quarry blur. The moai are no longer individual puzzles but become part of the mountain's contour, like sleeping figures in a vast, rumpled bed. You take a deep breath, and the last vestiges of the mystery, the frantic need to solve it, drift away. What remains is not an answer, but a feeling. A feeling of scale, both human and chronological. You think of the hands that worked here, not as a faceless collective, but as a chain of individuals. A father teaching a son the angle for the ad strike, a group of friends laughing as they synchronize their pull on a rope, a priest chanting as the choral eyes are set. You see the continuity, the love in the labor. The project was never about the destination of a finished statue on a platform, it was about the journey of making it together. The quarry wasn't abandoned because that journey lost its meaning. The journey was simply interrupted. The final note of the symphony was cut short, but the music that was played was rich, complex, and profoundly human. You stand one last time before Te Takanga, the giant in the mountain. In the twilight, it no longer seems like a failure of ambition. It is a possibility. A testament to a society that dared to imagine on that scale. They looked at their world and asked, what can we create together? The silence that followed is not their failure to answer. It is our failure, for centuries, to hear the answer they left in the stone. They did not vanish. They adapted, they endured through unspeakable trauma, and their descendants walk the island today, reclaiming the story. The moai are not relics of a dead people. They are ancestors of a living one. Your journey here is done. The facts have been laid out. The 30 workshops, the walking experiments, the demographic collapse from disease. The debates will continue, about the nuances of social structure, the precise role of the rats, the tempo of the work, and that is as it should be. Good history is a conversation, not a verdict. But the old, simple verdict of ecocide has been overturned. In its place is a story that is harder, sadder in its way, but ultimately more respectful. It is the story of a brilliant, resilient culture that met challenges we can understand, and was ultimately felled by a force it could not possibly have foreseen or defended against. There is a humility in that narrative, for them and for us. Now, as the first stars prick the darkening sky above the Pacific, let's slow down. Let the images soften. Let your breathing settle into the rhythm of the gentle night breeze that now stirs the grass at the base of the statues. Picture the quarry not as you saw it in the harsh daylight, but as it is now, a landscape of soft monochrome, where shadow and stone merge. The moai are keepers of the long quiet. They hold the memory of the tap-tap-tap of tools, the creak of ropes, the chants of the workers. They hold the silence of the years that followed. And they hold the quiet of this present moment, where you, having journeyed through their story, can finally let it be. The mystery of Easter Island is not a problem to be solved. It is a place to be felt. A reminder that behind every grand historical narrative, every rise and fall, are the simple, profound human acts of creation, community, and care. The giants of Reino Raraku never spoke. But now, if you listen with more than just the need for an answer, you might just hear the echo of what they were always meant to be, not warnings, but witnesses. So let the final image be a gentle one. See the moon rise over the rim of the volcano, its silver light tracing the curve of a moai's cheek, pooling in the empty eye socket that once held a gleaming coral eye. Feel the coolness of the night air, a clean contrast to the day's dust. Hear the distant, rhythmic crash of the waves on the black sand beach, a sound that has been here longer than the statues, and will remain long after. The story of Rapa Nui is not a closed book. It is a volume with some pages tragically torn out, but with others being carefully, lovingly restored. The long silence is breaking, not with a shout, but with the steady, patient work of new understanding. There is a peace in that. A peace that allows you to release the weight of the mystery and simply be present with the legacy of an incredible human achievement. The night is deep and quiet now, the island a silhouette against a star-strewn ocean. The journey is over. The facts have settled. The debates can rest. It's time to let the stillness of the quarry, the patience of the stone, and the vast, forgiving quiet of the Pacific night ease your own mind. Whatever puzzles your day held, whatever noise clamored for your attention, let it all fade into this calm, historical deep. The giants are keeping watch. You can sleep now. Let your breath slow, and your thoughts drift as gently as the clouds now passing over the face of the moon. All is quiet. All is well.